Our subject, near-death experience and what does it teach us? It's a long-awaited topic which we had to postpone several times due to a number of reasons, including the COVID period. But finally, we are able to make it happen, but certainly not without the support from our main speaker, whom we will introduce in a while. Today's session is sure to provide exciting revelations for everyone, especially medical practitioners, first responders, and anyone who has a close relation, who has had a near-death experience. And I would like to include the spiritual seekers who are into this type of topic, and it's going to be very interesting for them as well. Now, near-death experiences are unusual experiences that occur when a person has been, for instance, in a potentially fatal situation or dead and revived. As we mentioned in our e-flyer, these have had profound life-changing effects on the experiencer thereafter. Now, we have a simple ground rule. You can send in your questions through the chat or ask them direct from the speaker when the floor is open for questions. This session will last for 1 hour and maybe 1 hour and 15 minutes or so, including the Q&A. Let me now ask my colleague, Dr. Kushan Dharmawardena, to introduce our speaker, who will present to us today's topic, near-death experience and what does it teach us. Dr. Kushan, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vipula. It's a great honor for me to introduce Dr. Mahendra Perera. Mahendra, or better known as MH, is a consultant psychiatrist practicing in Melbourne. He obtained his MBBS from the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, PhD from University of Sheffield, and has qualifications as a psychiatrist from UK, Sri Lanka, and Australia. He has been interested in the concepts of spirituality and trying to have a better understanding about life in general. With regard to near-death experiences, he has read widely on the topic, interviewed people who have had these experiences, written articles in peer-reviewed journals, and is a co-editor of a book on near-death experiences. He would like to present his thoughts and understanding of the topic and have a discussion following the presentation. It's so nice to see over 25 participants at the moment. So over to you, Dr. MH. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushan. Thank you, Vipula. Okay, so, well, that was a near-life experience. And this is why I put below here. And so it seems we have lived before, laughed before, and loved before. Who knows where or when? That's a quote I got from somewhere else. It's not to really talk about rebirth or reincarnation, but some food for thought. I'd like to dedicate this presentation to my mentor and godfather, Professor Jenner, who actually helped me tremendously. And this is my way of saying thank you to him. Some of you from Sheffield will know him as well. Right. What I'm going to do is actually talk to you about the concept of the near-death experiences, what it means in the classic understanding of an NDE, look at probable biological mechanisms, and more importantly, the effects of understanding near-death experiences with some concluding remarks. However, as we go along, there are narratives, a few narratives, which will again give us some understanding of what it means in a broad philosophical and a phenomenological sense, rather than from a reductionist biological perspective. Now, there are various definitions to this, and that's the whole problem here. Again, that's why I said it's more phenomena. It's a conscious experience. You know, people experience something which has taken place when they could have been dead or near dead. But of course, they have survived and come back to tell the tale. And a point here is, it is not necessary that you have a loss of consciousness, but some do. And again, Raymond Moody, who could be considered the father of this term near-death experiences, he wrote his seminal book, Life After Life, which is readily available if you are interested on Amazon. It's a situation. And there is a clear recollection of the event, even many years later. Kushan, can you mute everyone, please? And awareness of being separate from the body, and this is what some people call an out of body, but it occurs at that time when you are faced with a situation, such as even under general anesthesia, this can happen. Here are some situations where people have reported these. Near fatal accidents, pregnancy and labor, especially if there's bleeding, under general anesthesia, cardiac arrests, stroke, serious physical illnesses, and there could be survivors of attempted suicide. And finally, you don't need to have had any of these, but there have been people who have reported it in meditative states or just out of the blues. Now, a classic near-fatal accident was, there's a middle-aged lady who told me the story when she was about 20. They were all teenagers driving in a car, and they had a bad accident, and she saw herself like a ping pong ball blown out of the car, a ball, and some of the colleagues went through a wall and she bounced back and she was alive, whereas the colleagues who went through the wall died. And the important thing for her was that her wounds healed in a very rapid, dramatic fashion, even though the doctors didn't expect, and so on. So this is just a quick example. The cardiac arrests, there's a whole paper written on this and a couple of others where they've gone through cardiac arrest patients and then survivors of suicide attempts. Again, there are people who have had these experiences. So these are just situations in which some people have had this. Now, Kerry Packer, the late Kerry Packer, famously said, I've been there and I didn't have anything. Personally, I had a general anesthetic. The anesthetic told me something warm is going up your arm. The next time I remember was getting up in the hospital bed. Right. So it doesn't happen to everyone, but it does happen. What are the key components? And now this is again, I refer to Raymond Moody, who actually interviewed a large number of people and made what he called a composite of about 12 features. First of all, you have an experience as if you were drawn out of your body and you could see your body from above. And he said, say, for example, in a motorcycle accident, they could see their mangled body below, but they didn't much care. There's a tunnel experience of as if going through a tunnel. And that's cultural as well. When we read on the some people where there are volcanoes, they said as if it fell down the volcano. Meeting others, relatives, deceased relatives, unknown people, and so on. So there's a sense of meeting people. People means people. People means beings or people. And they describe it, they say there are no words to describe it, but the closest they can get is a transcendental feeling. There's immense peace and quiet. And why I put being of light in capital is that is supposed to be a being. Now, different people have called it God, all that is, whatever. It's a warm, enveloping light which draws you to it. It's bright, not yet not blinding. These are the descriptions people have given. Now, remember that everyone doesn't have all of this. Because if everyone did, then they would have read something and just told you to cook up a story. Then there is the life review. Again, a classic. Because the life review, I mean, like if you remember what Einstein said, time is not as we see time. They say your whole life flashed between your eyes within seconds, within milliseconds or whatever. That's the first thing, your whole life, a panoramic view. The next thing is you see the effects of your actions, how it affected the other person. So say you punch someone in the face, you would feel the pain that individual felt. There's no judgment, but just a review so that it's a sort of what you call a learning process for yourself. There's no one with a big stick whipping you to say you shouldn't have done that. And finally, the border, like this lady explained, it's that wall or border. And if you go beyond that, different people have described it in different terms. I don't know if you've read Harry Potter, you can remember one of his uncles going behind the veil. Again, it was the border. Can you please mute someone?
Yeah. No.
So these are the sorts of classic components which people have talked about. Then from other sources, again, the question of time, which I alluded to a little bit earlier. There's expansion or contraction. Knowledge. One of the men, I'll tell you about it a bit later, he said in Sinhalese actually, he knew a lot of things. Expansion of the self, they say, and also people have described, classically, people like Rajiv Bharti, who was an anesthetist who had a near-death experience, who's written about it. He was in the US. He said he traveled to India, where he's originally from, and saw what was happening there, which I believe has been corroborated. Then overhearing conversations you were not supposed to hear, because this classically has happened many a time in anesthesia as well, which people are aware. The anesthetists, if there are any, will say that, yes, you don't totally lose consciousness in anesthesia, but there are times when people do hear things. And the rapid healing, unexpectedly rapid healing, like I mentioned. Then other people have talked about unusual electrical activity and so on. Now, the issue is, if everything was peaceful and nice, it will be lovely, but there are fear-producing near-death experiences as well, where people are very, very frightened, and not commonly, but it's been written about. Children have had near-death experiences, and an author called Melvin Morse has written extensively. He's a pediatrician, I believe, and Kenneth Ring, he's passed away as well. He has documented near-death experiences where the blind people were able to see when they were in that near-death experience state. So just here's a message. This is what I have summarized from the children's near-death experiences. Again, you can see that other than contributing to society, which seems a bit, mature, The rest are more or less what children might say or have been told. So these are some things that the children's near-death experiences would teach us. Now, again, this whole life review, one lady, when I did this presentation, a lot of people who have near-death experiences are not apprehensive about talking about their own experience when this is being discussed. She said you're just about, she did get hit, but almost hit by a train. And took the whole life flash before me. That's the way she explained. Expansion and contraction of time. And again, that review of life, as I said, your actions are seen for what it's worth without judgment. Because sometimes, there is this judgment day or hell, etc., the yamas. So different cultures have this sort of fear-producing thing. But what these people say is that there is no judgment. You are the judge of yourself. So that fellow went back. The people up in heaven, well, they were not happy. So that's why they said, another stupid near-death experience, try not to take it personally. So the next thing, of course, we need to like to learn is, how did this happen? Again, to summarize, there's a potentially fatal situation, there could be anesthesia, or they have come to life after being dead. How do they explain this? So these are recorded somewhere in their brain, maybe their nerve cells, and the brain box is a complex thing. Memory storage is always debated topic. And like I'm speaking with you, it's translated to your vocal cords into speech. So then you might say, well, so what about it? But here is the catch. Are we transmitting information from an outside source, or are we the total source of information? And this is where it leads to a lot of debate, interest, and discussions. And that's where I'm happy to discuss my understanding, and different authors have different views. This is the attempted suicide. This was a 25-year-old soldier who related his story 17 years later. Again, he was very clear. He said he was climbing up. This is in his suicide attempt, following his suicide attempt. He's climbing up the stairs, and then he fell, and he said there was something, and the way he described it was as if he was cocooned in someone's arms and brought back to life. And it's a long narrative, but that was his recollection of the near-death experience. That was the gist of it. And he has ever since never attempted suicide and also appreciates life. Now, again, not everyone reports an NDE, and it could be rare. It's like, they found it, congratulations, it only took you 6,000, so many seconds to find the needle in the haystack. So you might think, is this like a needle in a haystack, Oh, rare things, yes, but does it happen? So we have again reviewed the literature, including some research we did ourselves. We commissioned the Roy Morgan poll in Australia. We got a population when there was about an 8% who had reported these NDEs. In USA, I think it's 1.5. I'm sorry, it says. Germany had a study with 4%. India, they said it was less than 1, but that study was methodologically flawed. In Sri Lanka, we had about 3%, studying again in a hospitalized population. So there it is, it generally fluctuates anything between, nothing to about 25%. These suicide attempters got 100% because there were 7 in that study. They were all people who jumped off the Westgate Bridge, and they survived. The 0 was from our study in Sri Lanka and Ragama Hospital, where they were attempted suicides, but we would really call them para-suicides, and none of them had an NDE. The cardiac arrest, the most famous study was done by Van Lommel, which was published in a very prestigious journal called The Lancet. And this was around 2010, I believe. And overall, life-threatening situations, they say there are about 25%. And one of the interesting things is when this thing was being given, a cardiologist who's, I put non-believing, he had said, I have never had anyone have this in my whole experience. And then one of the patients who had it said, God, you're the last person I would tell you if I had it. And that actually changed his view. So you see, this is where, again, we need to be careful, at least, and I'll come to that a bit later, but to have an open mind rather than saying that doesn't happen. Now, this was a man from Sri Lanka in part of one of our studies. And he said he was observing things while being out of his body. It was after a heart attack. Saw a deceased father wearing white clothes. You might say that's cultural. Saw events happening in his house, but could not intervene. Now, this is where that projection occurs. Thoughts are moving very fast. Expansion of knowledge. People have said they understand much more, a huge, vast knowledge, which they just cannot even bring back. Again, if you remember, I don't know whether you read the Celestine Prophecy, that's a fictional story, but they talk about that, and other people as well. A great sense of calm, that sort of peacefulness, saw a very bright light and did not want to come back, but was sent back. So this is the sort of, this narrative actually captures many of the components, and this sent back is something, again, people talk about. Either they were asked to go back, or they didn't want to go back, they were forced to go back, or they had a choice whether to stay or go back, and for children or whatever, they came back. And one of the most famous ones was Anita Murjani, whose story, she's written books about it and talked. You can Google that name. She said she was given the option of staying or coming back. And she said if she stayed back, that didn't survive, she had I think it's a Hodgkin's lymphoma, one of the things, and she was clinically dead. She said all her bloods would be abnormal, but if she came back, all the bloods will be normal. And she actually quotes those records, which I have not personally seen, but I have no reason to doubt the veracity of that. So there are many strange things here. And that's what puts me on to the next point of the veracity of these. Yes, if every narrative was the same, you can say all the people read the book and just rattled it off. It's like our field is psychiatry. If everyone has the symptoms which is listed in the DSM and they come for your diagnosis, you can be quite sure they've kind of read the book and tried to pull. Now, clear memory retained over the years. This is something that I have met people who have told me 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. It's a very vivid, very clear recollection of what happened, unlike in a psychosis. Now, the language, the Thai people talk about the yamas and being taken to Yamaraj and green Thai curry. in the Indian near-death experiences, the classic is to say it's a clerical error and sent back, and so on. And if you are believing in God, you might say you saw God. If you believe Jesus Christ, you might say you saw Jesus Christ, and so on. And a lot of these people don't even tell you their stories, because unless you actually let them tell you, they don't, because there is no secondary gain. Although, as I said, books have been published by certain people, famously, I put the names there then, who had these and want to talk about it. Yes, there is monetary gain, I suppose, lecture tours, etc., but it has also become a way of life for them. And interestingly, it's not from one place or one country, it's across the globe, from one end of the world to Australia, which is called the arse end of the earth by one of our illustrious prime ministers, and from maybe not from the North Pole, but up Russia down to wherever. And we did write a paper on this as well. Again, we talked on the phenomenology because different people expressed similar views with different expressions. It's like trying to explain, snow to someone in the Amazon. He might not know it. He might say it's very cold. So there are differences, but the phenomenon for us seems the same. And certainly we can share these papers if anyone is interested. Now, again, there is feeling of peace and transcendentalness, and they have been etched into their memories. The good feelings remain over the years. The light, as I said, warm, enveloping, embracing, and almost like a magnet, we are drawn into it. And everyone claims it's a being. Again, as I said earlier, whatever you want to call that being, they describe it as from a human perspective, a living thing. Now, how can we explain? Pam Reynolds, you can read it, she's on the Wikipedia, the neurosurgeon who, actually Pam Reynolds was under anesthesia. She had a neurosurgical operation. When her heart was stopped, her whole body was cooled down, and she explained what happened. She said she saw. But then an anesthetist said that provided a rational explanation. The neurosurgeon, actually, I think it was a BBC interview. The neurosurgeon said, I can't explain. This was in Australia, a lady who was not coming out of anesthesia. And she told me the story. While she was in the next room, the doctors were feverishly trying to make her come round. She saw her husband was in the next room, calling the children and saying that mom was almost gone. Now, again, you might say she overheard and anesthesia, but the surprising thing is she actually said she saw her husband. So again, yes, there is room to imagine that. This lady, Anita Murjani, she was an Indian lady who lived in, not Holland, sorry, she was living in Hong Kong. And then this is where her, I think it's a leukemia which started. And then, like I said, told if she wanted to go back, her bloods will be normal. And it was normal because she came back. And so there are many stories like this, which are worth giving heed to. It just tells us so much about, we are like a microcosm in a macrocosm. So it's like the astronauts who go up say they see the world very differently. And a list of authors and references are part of these slides, and we can share it around. So the brain scientists look at mainly the red area, the parietotemporal cortex, and these are the other cortical areas of the brain. So they think a lot of it arises at the temporal cortex. And so what a person called Olaf Blanke, actually, he's still around. I've seen him talk. He stuck needles in people's brains at that point, at the temporoparietal junctions, and showed that they had out-of-body experiences. And again, papers have been written on this. You use drugs, hallucinogens. Ketamine, for example, you can have out-of-body experiences. Electrical stimulation, that's what this chap did. Optic nerve damage, epileptiform seizures, I put that twice, sorry. And when they spin people at high Gs, especially prior to space explorations, people have been out of the body. So the key is, yes, there have been scientific studies, I like to say so-called scientific, yep, to our knowledge today. And again, people have written, I think this is 2023, I think I made a boo-boo there. Yes, 2022, I think. We can send these papers if you're interested, because there are research articles that talk about the near-death experiences, the relationship of science as we know it today, and what people have experienced. Now, there's a classic problem. People will say these people didn't die. And did the person actually die? And has the Grim Reaper taken away and brought them back? Or didn't they die? Now, with the definitions, there are definitions of death and standard accepted definitions, which I won't go to, but we all use that. However, are these people who cheated death or didn't die? I don't know. And a classic again was Dr. Ritchie. I think it was, I forget his first name. He was a psychiatrist. Actually, he was the impetus for Raymond Moody, because Ritchie was, I think, from following war, he was in a mortuary, and the mortuary attendant realized that he was not dead, and then he's written about his own experience. It's George Ritchie. Again, these people can be Googled. They're all there. Now, some of my colleagues might say they are all hallucinatory phenomena. My contention against that is hallucinations are not that clear. They can be clear, but they're usually forgotten after some time. These people are very, very clear, lucid, and rational in their explanations, whereas, psychosis, schizophrenia is very different. Some people might say rambling of a deranged mind. But for me, at least, having listened, read, followed, it does not fit these categories. In fact, as a psychiatrist, I do treat people with schizophrenia or psychotic illnesses. So again, as with any good thing, Americans drive on the wrong side of the road, we drive on the right side of the road. There's always the so-called rationalist explanations. So they would say these are knowledge gathered before the event, after the event. People expected this to happen. So when they came alive, they thought this happened. Now, just a bit of food for thought. Again, look, the problem is these narratives have been described over hundreds of years, in fact, thousands, because I think the Ur of Chaldees or something, again, there was an experience described, which Raymond Moody talks about in his book. And these narratives are unchanging over time and across cultures. As I said, across cultures, the difference is the expression. Science is an evolving paradigm, and we need science. We need the science to fill up the petrol, pay for the price. But how many times do you get exactly a liter? Or science, we've now moved from particle theory to quantum theories, all sorts of things, and chaos. So, look, I respect science, I use statistics, but I also know the limitations. And the near-death experience people have not necessarily have probes stuck in their brains, nor have they used drugs. They could be just, bleeding to death or almost being in terrific accidents. And of course, you might argue that that set off a train of chemical events. So what can you do in these situations, especially if you meet someone after a traumatic accident? And people won't talk about it. One lady said, Doctor, I have not even told my husband what happened. You can ask people, you can be kind, you can give permission for another to tell the story, especially if they've been involved in a traumatic situation or some big issue has happened. And for us, we can always consider our own actions and the effect it has on others. Whether you like it or not, if you punch someone, the other person is going to get hurt. And I'm not saying blindly to turn the other cheek. We need to take care of ourselves, but also we need to consider even a harsh word that's put out, how it affects the other person. And finally, if someone tells you the story, and again, people who have had these stories told could be potentially considered to be mad. And luckily, we are not in that era where witches were burnt at stake and so on. But still, there is a lot of discrimination, and that's why a lot of people don't talk about it, or those who are brave enough write books and try to, I think, educate as well. So just coming to the end of this, do not fear death. This is one thing very common among the NDers who had placebo. They say, we are not frightened of death. We know, oops, Siri got up, sorry. We know that that's not the end. We know there's much more to life, death than death. Spiritual awakening.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry. I don't know how to shut up Siri.
No problem.
And also, it's about not taking life for granted, understanding that there's a better purpose. The love and service to fellow human beings. I'm reading this out because it may not be clear on the slides. As I said, life continues beyond the veil of death. And a lot of time, people who have had these NDEs say that they are less interested in the social and material success. They're more into the philosophical things. And so much so that some people have got, had problems because the other high-flying businessmen sometimes might give up everything and just do nothing or do some charitable work. And then the others around him might get upset. As I said, the knowledge is vast, but sometimes it's not retained, and healing of ailments. So there are many things that people have mentioned that they have learned. And these are some lessons, like even the simple thing of taking time to smell the roses would be things that we can all incorporate into a busy life if we want to. The post-traumatic stress. This is one thing that some people have talked about. They think it's stressful, especially after the fearful experiences. And others are angry because the individual has changed. And again, I've given the references here, which we'll share the slides or put it up later on, and this can be checked out. The quintessential question, was there life before? Was there life after? Like someone said, God only knows. It's conjecture, but people who have had near-death experiences swear by the fact that life goes on. So, like to, just before I finish up, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. It's a lovely quote. I think Shakespeare, or whoever wrote it, some people say Shakespeare didn't write it, had a good understanding of, I think, had a good understanding of what was going on. And this is, again, coming through a concept from the near-death experiences, the concept of oneness, which says that we are all connected to each other. And someone said it's like a branch of the trees. We are all different branches, but we are all part of the one tree. And that's why, actually, this was quoted by President Clinton at the funeral of Richard Nixon. And interestingly, there was a comment that there was an inflection in the voice of the young president. Grant that I may realize that the trifling of life creates differences, but that in the higher order of things, we are all one. It's a profound statement. This is our contribution, which we published many, many years ago. Howard, I think you have been very helpful in this venture. And here are some authors I've just put down for your interest. Again, we will make these slides available. And there are many narratives on YouTube channel. You can just put near-death experiences. I think Eben Alexander is one, and Vincent Tolman is another one. So there are quite a number. And again, it's hard to say this is all bunkum. You know, there must be something to it. These are a few references. Again, there's a whole lot more. Some of it is our research. Susan Blackmore, who's a non-believer, also said, look, we don't know what's happening, and so on. So I think I'll end this, and I must thank my mother-in-law who pointed out that I had the wrong bird last time I did this talk, so I quickly changed it. Amma, you must be listening, so you'll be happy. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahendra Perera, indeed, and that's a wonderful presentation. In fact, this is the first time that I myself came across a presentation of this nature, which I have been looking forward to from you in the past. Now, we will open the floor for questions. You can either send in your questions through the chat, or you can ask Dr. Mahendra Perera direct. But until you come back, let me ask Dr. Perera about, this is a topic that could probably bring science and spirituality closer, because you see, if you speak about spirituality, the religions, the philosophies, all that is somewhat contingent upon our assumptions as to what may happen, after this life. Now, the fact that the science has gone up to this extent, there will be more revelation. We don't know. I mean, at least, we have something to look at. And especially, I was intrigued by that, what you mentioned, that do not fear death, I mean, it's a powerful message emanating from this, from this finding. And this is the most feared among the masses. You fear death, you see. And if this study reveals, do not fear death one way or another, that itself is a great relief. So my question is, Dr. Perera, now, is there a growing tendency to continue with this type of research in your area in the future?
Yes. Look, First of all, funding is not that great because there's no drugs or money, pharmaceuticals involved. Yet people are doing research. There is a journal called the Journal on Near-Death Studies, which I'm also a co-editor there. People continue, there are a bunch in England who do, Sam Pania and others who are doing research. Bruce Grayson is a professor of psychiatry in Virginia. So there are people who have been looking at this. My own work has been more out of interest, and I'll continue to, when I retire, continue to look at this a little more in detail. But certainly there is ongoing research.
MH,
Yeah.
thank you very much for a very, very informative presentation. But may I ask, do you find this commoner in societies where they believe in rebirth? Say, maybe Buddhist.
No,
Is there
actually,
any...
when we looked at the epidemiological statistics, it's more or less, I mean, it's very difficult to get any hard data. But when we looked at across the board, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference. So
Right.
I would think that it is not so, because there are many people who don't believe anything, and then when they had this, come to agree. And again, this is not rebirth, but it's, or reincarnation, but it's more about the near-death phenomena, as they say in Sinhalese, eloa gihin meloa aava.
Yes. Okay.
There, come back.
Sorry. Other question is, how come you said there is no fear involved in all this? I mean, everyone is frightened of death. And you say in this near-death experience, there was no fear involved. They are not frightened.
So what
how do you
what they have said, and that's why I said it's phenomenological, what they say is when they cross to the other side, whatever that is, there was a tremendous feeling of peace, love, transcendence. And therefore, when they returned, actually, some didn't want to come back because it was so peaceful out there. They say it's a heck of a lot better than living down here. So why should we feel? They don't advocate suicide, by the way. That's a different thing.
Okay.
That's the
right.
Question.
Excuse me. Are these experiences related to their religious views or whatever they think of?
Not necessarily.
About life
and death. Not necessarily. Although they are more or less in line. I still remember one of my colleagues said, he's from the Jewish community. He said there was a truck driver who had no experience of Judaism, had a near-death experience, which was very much in keeping with the Jewish beliefs. So it goes every which way. Yes, there is some commonality, like the Thais who talk about the Yamas and the Yamatots and so on. But it goes every which way. But as I said, it could be that their experiences are translated through their understanding of culture, society, and language.
And some talk about this light they see. But can Buddhists say that? Do they?
I mean, that man, that particular 50-year-old man I talked about, did talk about the light, and he was from one of our Sri Lankan studies. So you might say one sparrow doesn't make a summer, but look, I just pulled out only relevant bits, but there's so much across which you can actually look at. And yeah, I don't want to get into an argument about or discussion about, I'm happy to discuss religion, but this is the near-death experiences that people have experienced. And not everyone has seen the light.
Can I?
Yes.
Can I come in again?
Yes, sure.
Now, these situations where you don't expect to die, maybe accident or some serious illness, but how do you account for anesthesia? Because you go into anesthesia with the hope that you'll come back, and then you are unconscious after that. And when it gets prolonged recovery, how does that tally with the rest of the cases of near-death experiences?
Okay, so
Understand my question, I hope.
so the near-death experiences have occurred under different circumstances, situations. Rajiv
Yes.
Party, who was an anesthetist himself, had a bad prostate problem, and then he had to be operated on, and he had a near death. He's written a whole book about it, and this was all under anesthesia. And there were very bad comments made, which he had told the anesthetist later on, and he said they never looked at me thereafter. So it's a phenomenon that occurs under different situations.
Okay.
I have a Rangika. Yes, I have a near death. All right. Yes, certainly. I'm quite happy to get an email. Maybe I'll put the email I used. Comment. I'm not surprised there are about 30 of us here, and someone has already said, I have had a near death experience. So I thought it's about 1 in 10 generally, but it goes every which way. So the statistics, the epidemiological statistics come between 0, which is sort of, to about 30%. So in this sort of nebulous field, if I might say, or enlightening field.
Yeah, it's a nice talk. Thank you. But I just few things. One is one Sri Lankan guy 40 years ago came for operation, and he said this out of body experience. Did you have any anesthetic before? He said yes. I had a hernia repair, and during the hernia repair, I climbed up the ceiling and I watched my operation from there. Right. Now, that was the only time I have heard something like that, but I have heard several times saying, Doc, you wake me up when I was about to do something on the Jamaican beach. Okay. so these are, what I think is in anesthesia, we take people down from consciousness to unconsciousness, 4 stages. And plane 4 on the 4th stage is where surgical anesthesia is, and stage 5 is death. So we take them with chemicals right down to near the
death.
Critical point.
Yeah.
And it may be that people are dreaming at that point, and they come out with the near-death experience, and they never come out with the jolly experience they have during those unconscious periods. So the thing is, now we have got these new brain monitors, which we use regularly in UK hospitals for, they call it oxygen brain monitor, but it's like a EEG thing. And if you can get somebody who is in a teaching hospital like Leeds or somewhere to do a sort of a preliminary study about the depth of anesthesia and the recollection of events, that'll be interesting to see what's happening.
There are
And
some
the other thing is,
I mean, if you're chopped up and burnt, that's it. You're not going to come back. But it's that sort of gray area.
Yeah, the thing is, the cesarean section is different because there you give an induction agent and get on with the cesarean without starting the gases. So at the edge of 20 seconds or 30 seconds, if the baby is not out, then the mother might feel or come to know about what was going on until the anesthesia is deepened. So that's a different kettle of fish. But what I think is this near-death experience is also a chemical reaction-like thing.
Could be.
So because we give nasty chemicals, and then
I think
they
you might be interested in reading the story of Rajiv Party, who actually under anesthesia went to India, he said, and saw what was happening there. So, look, there are various theories. There's a lot of chemicals happening. There's a soup of chemicals in our brain, and you guys take us down. But sometimes people do hear while they are under anesthesia and supposed to be asleep.
Yeah, that's when the induction, that's when the gas runs out and the anesthetist doesn't notice it. When the sevoflurane vaporizer empties and you don't notice it, then patients will hear what they are talking.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll just ask one question, Dr. Vipula. There were so many questions coming from the audience, so let the audience give more answer the questions, come up with more questions. But Dr. Emmett, what I would like to know is now in your presentation, you told lessons from ND, gave a lot of positive experiences and all that. And then you said that after near-death experience, most people don't fear death and all that. But can you give some specific findings which you have come across of any persons who have really experienced things positively?
Yeah. Now, again, for example, that lady I told you about, her whole positive experience was that her wounds healed incredibly fast, quite in an inexplicable way. She said that she was more intuitive about people and there were more people drawn to her. Then the soldier who attempted suicide said that he would never want to do it again. And people, just thinking back to the guy, another man I met who attempted suicide, again, he said he doesn't fear death anymore. He survived his suicide attempt, and so on. So these are the positive things that people have spoken of. The fear of death is gone, that's virtually gone. Except,
so by and large, you think none of us should fear death, nor we should fear near-death experiences.
I'm going to put it back to you, say that's personal.
Thank you. Let's open the floor to others, please. Thank you. Doctor, thank you. Very nice.
Any more questions from the audience?
We are looking at the second, you're giving a second chance of living that I believe you're talking about. You're talking about the survival and also going through. I have already gone through just some personal experience of these areas. First one was I was a sportsman during my rugged time. I got a concussion. So that was my first experience of going through whatever the subject that you're talking about. I was very curious to find out exactly what's the topic is all about, but I think I got a lot of input in here. Now, the second one, when also I went for those were my youth days. I was got into a current that was again, I was dragged in and I was taken by some fishermen and brought back. So and the third experience was okay. I got a cardiac arrest. So I've really got 3 chances of the topic that you're talking about. The survival is the area, and a lot of experience and a lot of opportunities, so many things that I've given in my life onto this. So the second chance, we are talking about the second chance. What exactly should be as a person should do to the community or whatever the areas that you wish to go into that. I mean, your living conditions, you got to contribute something for the community, the social life, and so many things are involved. So the topic is such, the survival you're talking about. The second chance, I would say, that the topic would be.
I think the answer to your question is, first of all, we need to understand our position in life, amongst everyone else, that we are all interconnected. We are not isolated. Secondly, material is necessary. I couldn't do this without the Zoom, for example, right? But we need not be totally and absolutely materialistic. They say 80% of the world's wealth is locked up in 20% of the people, right? So then I can just read to you something which I had treasured, which is another, you said, can I give you a message? I shall pass through this world but once. If therefore there be any kindness I can show, or any good things I can do, let me do it now. Let me not defer it or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. I think that's a very profound little thing I found once, and I saved it up. I'm just trying to summarize and give a succinct or synopsis of, as an answer to your question, which is very, very profound and big.
And
Thank you.
second chance, what you're going to do about for the community or to the world. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
Doctor.
Any other questions? Or yeah.
What was their level of consciousness?
It has varied from no loss of consciousness, like the woman I told you who was just about to be hit by a train but didn't hit. I actually was in a near fatal accident, but again, time seemed to have stopped for me. I was able to calculate everything and get out of it, which is still to this day inexplicable. Two, the parasuicide attempts which we studied at Ragama Hospital, no loss of consciousness, no NDE. Two, the 100% NDEs who had all attempted suicide, again, or jumping over the Westgate Bridge, and then under anesthesia when they were totally unconscious, or during brain surgery when even their bodies had been cooled down, and so on and so forth. And Pam Reynolds is a classic example of that, but I'm sure that you might find others as well. So from conscious to, and also some people have had this even spontaneously, to totally unconscious.
Did these people you interviewed, did they say that they want to do better later in life after this episode?
Right.
Did they become better in their behavior, in their attitude to life? Was there any difference afterwards?
It's difficult for me to judge that, to be quite honest, because these people were interviewed by me quite a while ago. But most of them were, I know, not afraid to tell their story and be quite open and honest about it. And I think, I can't definitely say, their worldview, their perceptions have changed for whatever we call the better.
Thank you. Yes, that's all for me.
I think we've come to the end of our days, isn't it?
I think, yes.
Thank you very much for everyone who joined in, because that's what makes this worthwhile. Thank you.
Indeed,
Thank you.
because we had 34 participants, and all 34 remained till the last question. So let me now do the honors, and we must express our gratitude to Dr. Mahendra Perera, because in fact, this particular seminar, it goes back to about a month ago, when three of us, myself, Kushan, and Dr. Mahendra, we sat in Melbourne and we discussed how we are going to present this. So it has come out well. So thank you very much.
Experience with Kushan over dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a lovely dinner, and I think finally it happened. So I'm very happy over that. And so, Dr. Mahendra Perera, we are very grateful to you for that. And then I must thank my colleague, Dr. Kushan Dharmawardena, because he was the mediator who sort of did the communication and the coordination to ensure that this will go smoothly. So, Dr. Kushan, thank you very much. And then we are also thankful to the Global Spiritual Forum. The founder of this forum is Dr. Chandijawardena. But then he being in Vancouver, there's no way he could join, this meeting. But definitely he's going to watch the recording. So I'm also conveying his comments that he was looking forward to watch the recording of this session. So finally, and not the least, our audience and those who joined this session, and being Saturday, usually you have your own work on Saturdays, but nevertheless, the topic itself was interesting. So thank you very much for coming on board. And we will assure you that we will have something, interesting topics like this in the future. And until we come back to you, so thank you very much once again, and good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. God bless. Bye.